welcome to a brand new episode of the Michele Tafoya podcast. I have a favor. Just hit subscribe wherever you're watching or listening. It does not cost you a penny to subscribe. So why wouldn't you? We've got great content, including today. It's a Wildcard Wednesday, which means we go a little bit wild on the internet. We kind of look around at what's trending, what's going on, and we bring it to you for your perusal. So without further ado, now I will admit to you that I am recording this on the Tuesday before the Wednesday. And on this Tuesday, it's President Trump is in Pennsylvania giving a big rally. I don't have sound of that for you. Sorry. But I've got lots of other really interesting stuff, including this. I don't know if you heard about this case out of the United Kingdom where two 17-year-old Afghan asylum seekers were there and raped a 15-year-old girl. And it's horrific. And the lawyer for one of the young men said, look, they just didn't know any better. And so you should really just forgive them and let them go. They come from a totally different society. Well, listen to Nigel Farage and what he had to say about that. Let's roll it.
And I'm sorry, but if you as a country allow young men who come from countries in which women aren't even classed as second-class citizens, and you put them up in four-star hotels, allow them to work illegally, their attitude towards women is completely different to ours. So the social effects of this are appalling as well.
So here's the thing. Ultimately, both the young men were sentenced. One has a detainer order as well. So there was justice in this case, considering how you measure out justice. But look, here's something essential about illegal migration, illegal immigration, wherever it is. If these two young men came from a society that's completely different, with completely different values from the UK, now you hope and you expect that they'll learn the laws, they learn to assimilate socially and in terms of what they're expected to do and how they're expected to act. Apparently these two weren't, or even if they were, they decided to break the law anyway and rape a young girl. Okay, so this is one of the things about all of this. Not every country shares the other country's values. And in this case, the UK and Afghanistan, we had people from two very different kinds of societies where men do not look at women the same way. And so look at them as objects. And that is a thing, and it is real. And so I don't think it's wrong or xenophobic for a country that's in existence to expect others who come to their country to obey the law, speak the language after a period of time, even if it takes some time, and play by the same rules as everyone else who's a citizen of that country and it has established. I don't think it's that tough. Every country has a unique set of values. And in this case, these two guys really didn't assimilate at all. And now they're in jail, and I think one is being deported. I wanted to get that in because that was a really big case out in the UK. And it's really important to note, if you bring people in and you let them work illegally, and again, you house them and you give them all the benefits your country has to offer, and you don't expect them to follow the rules, that's a recipe for social disaster. All right. Speaking of social disaster, Randi Weingarten, she's back on a podcast, and here she is talking about, she's answering a question about all the chaos during COVID. And I want to remind you that the teachers' unions were especially prickly about keeping kids home, out of school, and away from spreading their germs to teachers and other students. This is now, here we are, 2025. Here's Randi Weingarten. Roll it.
I do wonder what you think, looking back to that tumultuous period of time. Do you think that teacher unions and Democrats have done enough self-examination in the role they played in pandemic school closures? Were there mistakes made?
Yeah, of course there were. And there were mistakes made by everyone. There was huge mistakes made by the Trump administration to not be clear, to not focus on safety as they were focusing on reopening it. Reopening became political, not became something that we all should have prioritized.
Okay. Hello. You know what? When you don't have an answer for your own problems, when you can't come up with an excuse or you can't just own it, take responsibility for the mistakes you make, just point at Trump and that White House. Just point at the whole Trump administration. There's your out. And a lot of people will just accept that. Yeah, we did things wrong, but so did everybody. So did everybody. Not everybody. I mean, I think Florida did some really right things. I think there were other countries that never took kids out of school, and everyone survived to tell. So just own the mistakes, Randy. Quit pointing the finger. All right. Erica Kirk is making the television rounds because her late husband, Charlie Kirk, has one last book that is now being brought out for publication. I think it's available now. And Erica, as his widow, is promoting it. Now, I don't know if you've ever had your husband assassinated at the ripe old age of 32. But I'm guessing you haven't. And so you don't know what that's like. And you don't know what it's like behind closed doors versus what you have to do to present yourself in public. Because now Erica Kirk is a public figure. You know, it's amazing. The day he was shot, I think she had like 350,000 followers on Instagram. By the next morning, she had 5 million. I saw that for myself. So instantly, she became this representative of him, his family, and of Turning Point USA. But people, whenever she smiles, suggest, wow, she's not grieving at all. Well, there's a commentator, a political commentator named Mary Catherine Ham, who was 7 months pregnant when her husband was killed. I believe he was hit by a car and died. And she has a little sympathy for Erica Kirk. Roll it.
Yeah, I think it's really fitting that Charlie's message that he left behind is not bare-knuckle politics or even ideology, but pointing people toward God and toward a practical way of practicing their faith. I think that's what he was very much into, particularly at the end of his life, and Erica is stepping into those shoes to communicate that as well. When she notes that people don't know you, people don't know what's going on behind the scenes, I just want to note when she takes incoming and takes criticism about how she's living her life, because she is out there and she is a public figure. She's a public figure now because her husband was murdered in cold blood and because she believes in his legacy and because she wants to speak about it. Because she smiles or speaks well, that means she's powerful. She's a powerful woman of faith, and she is being given power to do this from a God who loves her. And people don't understand that the life she lives behind the scenes, she's probably shielding us from a lot of her innermost feelings. And I really, as somebody who was widowed myself with 2 young children, I admire the strength she's showing and the way that she's had to step into these shoes and to do this. And frankly, to do battle against darker forces who are trying to speak about Charlie's legacy themselves. She's the person to do it, and she's doing a great job.
It really is amazing to think about what that would do to your life. And how you have to present one face in public. You don't have to. But she chooses to. Because she's choosing to be strong in the face of all this horror in her life. That her 2 young kids will probably never remember their dad at a certain point, except through pictures and videos and the rest. And she's lost her husband in a brutal, unnecessary, targeted, evil attack, an assassination. So for those who see her smiling on a stage and say, oh, gee, there's grief for you, shut up. Sit it out. Because I bet you've never been through what she's going through. All right, you've heard about fraud in Minnesota. This is where I live, so this is particularly important. But we're hearing about it in Maine as well, and it's probably coming to a state near you. So be prepared. But really what's going on in Minnesota, I found a few videos that really explain it for people who aren't totally clear on how out of hand this is and what's going on. I want to start with this reporter, a local reporter, and then we'll get to some national stuff. But this local reporter from the ABC affiliate KSTP here in the Twin Cities put together this little piece. I want to roll it for you.
Okay, I just want to get this all out while it's still fresh in my head.
That's me, investigative reporter Eric Rasmussen with 5 Eyewitness News. I recently checked on this house in Burnsville, Minnesota, looking for info about a man named Abdikerm Idle.
Do you know where he is?
He fled the country in 2022, right before being indicted for fraud, along with his boss and 45 others linked to feeding our future. Investigators say stolen taxpayer money paid for this house, and the feds filed paperwork to take it through forfeiture.
Do you know if the government is trying to take this house?
That's the voice of his ex-wife, according to a young woman who also spoke to me through the door.
Ex-husband. She says a couple years ago the government came, and she says they worked it all out. The question in all of this is Abdikerm Idle is still listed as the owner of this house here, and obviously neighbors around here have questions about what's going on with the efforts to recover the proceeds of all the fraud. So we'll keep asking questions.
Well, thank you for doing your job, and I hope more do. Because immediately now, again, this fraud is so enormous and so broad in its reach. But people want to start pointing the finger at others, not the people who committed the fraud, but at others. Why? Why do we do this? So why, when we find an illegal immigrant in another state and he gets arrested and sent to Venezuela, we take his side instead of the side of the people he victimized? Why? Why do we do that? Why do we take the side of men who want to compete against women instead of the side of women who are being treated unfairly in that whole mess? So I don't know why, but let's go on to the next one. I thought Senator John Kennedy of Louisiana, even though he's way down in Louisiana, he's in D.C. and he understands what's going on here. I love listening to this man. He's been on our podcast. You should look it up and listen to that one. Here he talks about it, and enjoy.
Feeding our futures went to the state and said, if you stop giving us this money, we're going to call you racist and we're going to sue you. And you don't want to be in the news. Now, here's what, and you say, well, why didn't the employees do something? They did. They told the people higher up, the people with the flags in their office. And you know what they did? Nothing. You know why? Well, here's what the legislative auditor in Minnesota said. He said that the threat of litigation and the negative press affected how the state politicians use their regulatory power. And here's what a fraud investigator in the Attorney General's office said. She said, there is a perception that, I'm quoting now, that forcefully tackling this issue would cause political backlash from the Somali community, which is a core voting bloc for Democrats. And in fact, one of the other witnesses in the fraud investigation said, look, I told the prosecutors, let me just give you a cold dish of truth. The 80,000 voting bloc of folks with Somali ancestry, you got to have their votes to win in Minneapolis. And if you're a Democrat and you can't win Minneapolis, you can't win in the state. So the politicians did nothing.
I hope you followed all of that. But basically, here in Minnesota, we have a very large Somali population, and it seems that politicians curried favor with them to keep them as a voting bloc. Not very different from what they do with, let's say, the teachers' unions or other unions. It's kind of like almost like an unspoken union. I'm not saying every single member of that community votes one way or the other, but they were treated like that by the governor, Tim Walz, by his lieutenant governor, Peggy Flanagan, by the attorney general, Keith Ellison. And potentially Ilhan Omar could be implicated here as well. I'm going to let the facts come in, but she certainly was rubbing elbows with some of the people who've been thrown in jail over this. So this isn't over, and it's despicable. And again, if people were going to blow the whistle on these groups, they would be called racist. It was bad. It is bad. We'll see just how far it reaches. It wasn't just Feeding Our Future. There was an autism case as well. Now, over the weekend, you may not have seen it on Face the Nation, but Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent was on, and he was asked about this particular fraud. Let's hear what he had to say.
That money has gone overseas, and we are tracking that both to the Middle East and to Somalia to see what the uses of that have been.
Okay, but you have no evidence of that money being used to fuel terrorism at this point, which is what some conservative writers are alleging.
That's why it's an investigation. We started it last week. We'll see where it goes. But I can tell you that, it's terrible. Representative Omar tried to downplay it, said, it was very, it was very tough to know how this money should be used. Yeah. She was gaslighting the American people.
Well, we'll talk to her.
Yeah, but when you come to this country, you got to learn which side of the road to drive on. You got to learn to stop at stop signs, and you got to learn not to defraud the American people.
Yeah, that'd be nice. I noticed that she said conservative writers have suggested that money was going to Al-Shabaab in Somalia, a terrorist group. I think that is why conservative writers. So is what she's saying then that liberal writers aren't looking into that? Because anytime money goes into Somalia, it's usually picked through by Al-Shabaab, which is a terrorist group. So that seems to be the common knowledge among people who understand that. We'll see. I'm going to let the facts come out, but she had to say some conservative writers. Okay. Then she had on Ilhan Omar. So let's roll that.
I want to pick up on where the Treasury Secretary just left off. He alleged that people who were tied to you or your campaign were involved in this broad, brazen scheme to rip off the Minnesota state welfare system. Do you want to respond to that? Do you know what he is referring to?
I really don't, and I don't think the secretary himself understands what he's referring to. We obviously had people who were able to donate to our campaign that were involved. We sent that money back a couple years ago. And actually, I was one of the first members of Congress to send a letter to the Secretary of Ag asking them to look into what I thought was a reprehensible fraud that was occurring within the program.
Well, listen, I'm going to, I think the secretary knew exactly what he's talking about. I think Ilhan Omar is doing everything in her power to distance herself from this, including maybe, yes, she did write a letter to the Secretary of Agriculture. Maybe that's true. But did she write it when she saw the writing on the wall that this was all coming to pieces? I don't know. So time will tell, won't it? Let's keep asking the questions. Because certain people committed crimes here, and it was highly disproportionately the Somali community. So does that make every Somali bad? No. I don't paint with those kinds of broad brushes. But this was certainly coordinated, and it originated with a very particular constituency of Minnesota. All right, let's leave with one to make you smile. We talk a lot about illegal immigration, and one of the reasons I get so tickled with a video like this is that, my ancestors came here legally and became part of the fabric of America. And my dad was incredibly proud to be an American. And he always told me, you won the lottery by being born here. And you're in the greatest country on earth. And I still believe that to this day. So here is a guy who is so happy and proud and excited because he did it the right way. Take a look.
I found out this morning that June 9th will be the day my wife and I will finally become American citizens. It's hard to express how grateful I am for the privilege to call myself American and to place my hand on my heart, to pledge allegiance to a flag that has been a symbol of freedom and opportunity for me these past 18 years. One question I've been repeatedly asked as an immigrant is to explain the difference between America and my home country. My answer has always been simple. In my home country, I woke up every day brimming with ideas, inventions, and dreams. The problem was my ideas stayed ideas, and my dreams stayed dreams. And eventually I became tired of limiting my ambition to the socioeconomic standing of my country. In America, I can wake up with an idea and build a prototype by sundown. In America, I don't ever have to worry that my dreams are too ambitious to become reality. That is why I came here, and the reason I feel privileged to become your fellow citizen.
Love it. And, you know, I've heard that a lot about some of these societies where people are coming from, that they just feel so limited, that they can't do the things they want to do because the governments don't allow it. Governments don't want free enterprise, whatever the case may be. But that is here. It always has been. It always will be. And you will hear, if you're in college right now or headed there, even maybe before that, how bad this country is. How bad our history is. And it's just so short-sighted and destructive and counterproductive to overlook all of the good that has come out of this country, all of the change, the evolution, the improvement, the growth, all of it. It couldn't happen but for our Constitution, our Declaration of Independence, our Civil War, all of those things that has made this country what it is. So is there room for improvement? Always, always. But I wouldn't take any other place. And with that, I'm going to say be brave, do good, and we will see you next time. You can keep up with the Trump administration when you subscribe to the Trump Report. It's an email that brings you daily highlights from the Oval Office right to your inbox 5 days a week. Subscribe today at SalemPodcastNetwork.com/Trump.